So module number 6, we're going to talk about iPerf in here. So our objectives, we're going to configure an iPerf test. We're going to talk about the differences between using TCP and UDP. Just as a note, the performance, and let's look at a much bigger picture. This has the performance test capability on there. With the performance test, we can run up to 10 gig full line rate, full duplex. We need to have an endpoint for doing that. And that endpoint could be one of our one-touch AT 10 gigs. It could be another EtherScope nXG, or it could be an OptiView. So if you are an OptiView user and you have 10 gig capability on there, you can use your OptiView as an endpoint too for doing your throughput testing. Long term, probably pretty good to have 2 EtherScope nXGs. So in this case, we will go ahead and after we get done doing this presentation, somebody had asked, hey, could you show us what the advantage of having 2 EtherScopes is? Well, I will show you what the advantage of that is. So in this case, we're going to talk about iPerf. Now, iPerf is a little bit different than the performance test in that iPerf uses software instead of the hardware. So we may not be able to achieve a full 10 gig, and our throughput rate is really going to depend on the server that we're talking to. Also, the performance test uses UDP. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we're not going to dig into all of those right now. iPerf supports both TCP and UDP. So we're going to go ahead and configure the iPerf setup. We're going to review the test results. We're going to look at uploading those test results to Link Live. So our iPerf app. This provides a way that we can measure the network throughput capability using either TCP or UDP. It does require that we have an iPerf 3 server at the other end. Now, that server could be a test accessory like this from NetAlly. That server could also be something like my Raspberry Pi right here. Now, in this case, with our Pi, our throughput test may be limited to what the throughput capability of what this Pi can do. So this is a Pi 3. It has a gig interface on it. We can also load it up on a variety of other servers. So if it supports iPerf 3, in fact, using Magic iPerf, I can even load iPerf on my cell phone and use that as an endpoint. So we do need to have a server at the other end. We can't do a throughput test out to nothing. So this is going to give us our up and down thresholds. Our up and down thresholds can be set for pass-fail. Okay, so I come out here to iPerf. First thing I need to do is give it an endpoint device. So we're going to select an interface, the IP address of the iPerf 3 server, the duration, the protocol, and we're going to set our thresholds. So our interface. The neat thing with iPerf can use any of the 4 ports that we have. We can use our wired port, our Wi-Fi port, our wired management, or our wireless management. Here's the thing. You have to run that auto test if you're going to use the wired port or the Wi-Fi port. Those have to be linked. Remember that little green chain link up there? Got to have that if we're going to use one of those ports. Now, in selecting the endpoint device, if you have a NetAlly test accessory, here, let's do this. I have claimed my test accessory to Link Live. So if I go out to devices, I can see right here, there's my test accessory. It was last seen at 1147, and there's its IP address, and it gives me some information about that test accessory. Now, if you have, if you've claimed your EtherScope nXG, and it is claimed to the same organization as your test accessory, watch this. I'm going to come out and I'm going to go to my home screen. I'm going to go to iPerf. We're going to go to our settings. And we're going to use the wired management port for doing our iPerf test. And that port supports up to gig. And I come in here to my IPv4 address. Now, if I delete that, notice Mike's test accessory shows up. Why? Because your EtherScope nXG went out to Link Live and said, hey, what test accessories do we know about? And it got those test accessories back from Link Live. So if I move that test accessory, the IP address here is going to change and follow where this test accessory went. So if you put a few of these in key locations around your network, so for instance, I could put one of these in Uta's office. So Uta, if she came back and said, the network's slow, that's where all my hair went, ripping that out. If she said the network's slow, I could select the test accessory at her office and run the test out to that. So I'm going to click on that, and it puts the IP address in. I didn't even have to type in the IP address. So I'm going to say OK. So now I come in and I say port. Well, we're going to leave that at 5201, which is iPerf 3. Our duration. I got these backwards. We'll go back. Let's talk about protocol first. TCP. What we're going to find is when we do a TCP test, the EtherScope nXG will transmit data as fast as it can. And the data rate is going to be limited by the link speed and by things like retransmissions. Also, it's going to be limited by the throughput capabilities of the device at the other end. So in this case, TCP is a great way to figure out what is this link capable of. Okay. UDP. With UDP, we transmit the data at a fixed data rate. We then compare the received data rate with the threshold. So I would use TCP to figure out what the link capability is. I would use UDP to say, this webcast. I know from the number of times that I've captured this webcast traffic that Zoom uses about a megabit per second. So if I was going to use my wireless network, which I do not, I've learned my lesson. I always use wired on my machine when I'm doing these webcasts. But if I were to use wireless, I would need to make sure that my wireless network could send 1 megabit per second reliably across the network. So this is where UDP works really well. UDP works well for things like voice over IP. I want to make sure that that's working. So if we come in here, we can choose which protocol we want to use. Then we can choose the duration. This is going to be the length of time. This is maxed out at 120 seconds. We'll see if that changes at some point. But right now, even if you can put in a custom value of anything less than or equal to 120, or you can choose one of these fixed values here. So let's go ahead and set that up. We're going to come over here. We're going to run this test. We're going to change this to TCP. And we are going to set our upstream and downstream thresholds. So what I'm going to say is for this network, I expect at least 100 megabits per second. Okay. So we are going to talk to our test accessory. We are going to send for 10 seconds, we're going to do upstream, 10 seconds for downstream. We're going to send that through our wired management port. We're going to see what kind of test results we get back. And to pass, we need to get at least 100 megabits per second. So what we see on here is our line right there is our limit. You can see that we were clearly above the limit. Our limit was set at 100. Our average throughput here was 525 megabits per second. Honestly, that's about the best I'm going to get out of the test accessory. So we'll see that if I talk to a different server, then I may be able to get more than 525. Keep in mind, our test accessory is running on a Linux box that's fitting into a device this size, and a lot of that is where batteries could go. Don't use the batteries on here. You would think that this was built by Duracell at the rate it goes through batteries. Works really good with PoE. Draws enough power that it kills the batteries in about 3 hours. But we were able to tell that we could get 511 megabits per second through there. So let's do this. Let's come in. And I'm going to bring up a terminal window here. And we're going to say SSH. Let's log into this Linux box. This is an Ubuntu Linux box I've got running as a VM. Actually, this one is a little hardware Linux box. I'm going to say iPerf 3 minus S. So I'm going to put that in iPerf 3 mode. So now we're going to come back here. We're going to change that device name. We're going to say 10.0.0.186. Okay. And we're going to rerun that. Now, in this case, we're not getting the throughput that we were getting before. We're getting about 169 megabits per second, which has exceeded my threshold of 100, so we passed. But why only 196 or 169? Well, in this case, I'm going through one of my MikroTik routers, and when you buy a 24-port switch router that does Wi-Fi and all these other things, and you get it for under $200, you're going to take a hit on something. And that is when we route on that router, we're only getting about 170 megabits per second routing. This is a great way to go in and run a test like that. Now, let's try something real quick here. Let's link up on VLAN 10. Okay, so now we're on the same subnet as that iPerf endpoint. I'm looking for my link right there. Now that I have my link, I can come in here to iPerf. We'll go to our configuration, and we're going to use the wired port. Have to have that link to use the wired port. Now let's see if our test results are any different. Ho, yes. A little bit different there. So now, instead of going through the router, we're using the VLAN tag, and so we're on the same broadcast domain. So we're able to tell the difference. We got about 170 before. Now we're getting 520. 461, much better. So using a tool like iPerf, we can start measuring our throughput and see what kind of throughput we get. So what I always do is I do a test with iPerf where I'm connected to the same switch as the endpoint. This gives me an idea of what kind of throughput is my maximum throughput based on the capabilities of the EtherScope and of that device. Once I have that number, then if I start putting other network devices in between, if my throughput goes down, I get an idea that it's probably those devices in the middle that's causing that issue. Now, the other thing we can do in this case is I could come in, I could change my protocol to UDP. Now, here's the big difference. Our upstream bandwidth with UDP, when we come in, we set our data transmit rate. So I'm going to say, I'm going to transmit at 10 megabits per second. I have to get at least 5 megabits per second for my application to work properly. Okay, so we'll run that. So here's the thing. With these tests, you have to know your network and you have to know what you expect. And you can't just make those numbers up. I always go back to like the software vendor and say, how much bandwidth do you need? Because who's the first person to come back and say it's your network? It's the software vendors. Their application's not working properly on your network, and they go, oh, well, it's your network. Okay, you can say that, but you need to tell me how much bandwidth you need. Well, we need at least 5 megabits per second for that to work, for us to be able to stream that video stream across the network. Okay, so let's say that we send that through and we're getting 9.8 when we set 10. Now we do see a little packet loss right there, and it graphs it out for us, tells us how much packet loss we saw up and down. And I've learned not to run this if I'm connected wireless doing a webcast because it can knock me down. But the neat thing is iPerf works on the wired and the wireless ports. So we can find out what can we get out of our wireless network. For instance, I'll change my port to my wireless management port. We'll run that again. There's our Wi-Fi management port. We're doing our iPerf test through that. Now, not quite as good as what we got on the wired, but still it exceeds our threshold. So we were successful. So our status, success. Even with our wireless, we met or exceeded that threshold we'd set. So now you want to be able to show that this is the case. This is really the result there. So there's a couple things I could do. One, if you want the fancy graphs, take your EtherScope, you hold down the volume down and the power button at the same time. And it takes a screenshot. So we can do that. We can do that screenshot with pretty much any screen on here. Or I can come up and I can click on my little overflow action button, say upload to link live. So we'll give that a name. We'll say save to link live. So now if we come back to link live, so there's our test results right there. Tells us our upstream. There's our downstream. And there's our test setup, who we were talking to, our test, our duration. Now, here's a cool one. I wanted to get fancy. I wanted to save the graphs with that. Well, what I did was I did a screenshot, right? So watch this. We can come in here and I can go to my gallery. There's my screenshot. So I can come up here, I can click on that, I could upload that, or I could save it to the last test result. So if we come back, there's our screenshot right there that we saved to go with that. So you could even download that screenshot. But you could save the graphs and stuff from there. So this gives you the results. We could also take a look at our screenshots on there. All right. So we can upload those test results to Link Live. And there's what those look like. Now, you want to save your iPerf settings. You want to be able to run iPerf again with those same parameters over and over again. Well, that's where we can come in. We can go into our iPerf settings, click on the settings. There's my save icon. I can say save as. So we can take all those iPerf settings that we set up in there and save those out. Give it a name. It's going to save that.